5 days after they cut my daughter out of me. I carried her up the porch steps, expecting nothing more complicated than a hot shower and my own bed. That was the whole plan. Ren was asleep against my shoulder, wrapped in the pale pink blanket the hospital sends every baby home in, and my body was still a map of everything it had just survived the incision pulling with each step, the deep ache that lived somewhere beneath it. I only wanted to be home. 20 years of nursing had taught me how a body heals, and mine was asking for stillness. Instead, there were strangers in my living room. 2 men in work gloves were carrying a brown sofa I had never seen through my own front door. A third came out for another box. For a full second, my mind simply refused it, the way you refuse a word in a language you don't speak. I stood on the top step, holding my newborn, and watched a woman I didn't know direct traffic in the house where I had assembled that crib, painted that nursery, planned an entire life. "I think you have the wrong address," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. The woman turned. She was older, gray-haired, kind-faced, and something in my expression made her set down the lamp she was holding. "Ma'am," she said gently, "we closed on this house 3 days ago." The strange part was how much of it was still mine. The clay flower pots I'd planted every spring lined the steps, geraniums still blooming. The wind chimes my mother gave me 20 years ago still hung by the door, turning in the October air, making the same small music they always had. Everything I looked at said home: the porch light, the crooked mailbox, the wear on the second step, and none of it was. I reached for the doorknob out of habit, my key already in my hand. It didn't fit. Someone had installed a brand new deadbolt, bright and unscratched, a lock I had never seen on a door I'd walked through 10,000 times. An older man came around the truck holding a folder, an apology already on his face. "I'm so sorry," he said. "The title company told us everything was finalized." He handed me a copy of the closing statement, and I made myself look. There was our address. There was my husband's signature, Marcus's. I knew it the way you know a face. And beneath it, on the line that mattered, was a signature that looked almost exactly like mine. The loops, the slant, the little tail on the last letter, almost. Except I had never signed it. Not once. Not ever. My hands weren't quite working. I got the phone out anyway and called Marcus. Straight to voicemail. I called again, and this time a recording told me the number was no longer in service. I opened our banking app with my thumb because my fingers were shaking too hard to type, and watched the joint account load the account where 12 years of 2 careers had quietly gathered. It wasn't frozen, it wasn't locked, it was empty. Every dollar had been moved somewhere I couldn't follow, cleanly, deliberately, days before I ever stood on this porch. Ren stirred against my shoulder. She made a small, sleepy sound, half a sigh, and one tiny fist opened and closed against my collarbone. That sound reached through all of it, the roaring in my ears. The strangers, the empty account, the forged name, and set me back down inside my own body. I couldn't fall apart. Not there. Not while I was the only thing standing between this 5-day-old girl and a world that had just proven it could take everything overnight. Later, I told myself, you can come apart later. When there is a wall to lean against and no one who needs you to be whole, not while you're holding her. The kind woman came back outside carrying my diaper bag, the one I'd left in the garage. "I found this," she said softly, and I understood she wasn't the enemy. None of them were. They had bought a house in good faith from a man who had already disappeared. I thanked her, because I didn't know what else a person said. I carried Ren back to the car, buckled her in, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine, because I had nowhere to point it. I would spend the next weeks learning exactly how this had been done to me. But there is one thing I understood right there on that porch, and it is the thing that still hurts most, even now. None of this happened while I was in the hospital. It only ended while I was there. People still ask me how I didn't see it coming. I understand the question. I've asked it of myself more nights than I can count. But you have to understand what the months before looked like from the inside. Because that is the cruelest part of this whole story, not the empty house, not the empty account, but how gentle the hands were that emptied them. During my pregnancy, Marcus was the best version of himself anyone had ever met. He never missed an ultrasound. He held my hand in those dim little rooms and cried the first time we heard the heartbeat, actual tears, and I loved him more for it. He rubbed lotion into my swollen feet every evening while we watched reruns of old detective shows. When my back ached at 3 a.m, he got up without a word and made me chamomile tea. He built Wren's crib with his own hands, cursing quietly at the instructions. And he painted the nursery a soft sage green because I couldn't decide between that and pale yellow. So he chose the one that made me smile. Our friends called him Husband of the Year. Sometimes I laughed and agreed. Why wouldn't I? I was watching a man prepare, tenderly, for the child we'd wanted for years. That was what I thought I was watching. The older woman came back out to my car before I pulled away. She tapped the window, apology in her eyes, and handed me the diaper bag again, as if to make sure I really had it. I looked inside it later, in the parking lot of a gas station, because I needed to know what was left of my life. Diapers, 2 bottles, a half-used pack of wipes, and a small stuffed rabbit, gray, one ear already loved thin, that I'd bought the week I found out she was a girl. That was all. Everything else was gone. My wedding album, my grandmother's quilt, the one she'd stitched by hand and left to me, the rocking chair my father built before he died, the one I'd pictured myself nursing Wren in. 12 years of a shared life, carried out of that house while I lay in a hospital bed, learning how to hold my daughter. I sat in the car and let myself remember the last thing he'd said to me. The morning I was discharged, Marcus texted instead of coming. Something urgent came up with a client out of state 2 days. Tops, don't worry about a thing. Love, everything will be ready for you and our girl when you get home. I remember reading it and feeling cared for. Everything will be ready. I smiled at the phone. My mother had offered to drive up, and I'd told her no, Marcus has it handled. Go rest. Everything will be ready for you and our girl when you get home. It is, to this day, the most frightening sentence anyone has ever said to me, because it was true. He had made everything ready. He'd just made it ready for someone else. The tears came then, and they came hard, the kind that bent you at the waist. I cried until the incision pulled so sharply I gasped, until I had to press my hand flat against it and breathe the way I'd taught 100 mothers to breathe. Then I did the only thing left. I called my own mother. She answered on the second ring. Nora, 1 word, and she already knew mothers always know from the shape of your breathing. Mama, my voice broke in half. I don't have a house anymore. There was a small silence, and then the steadiness only she seems able to find. Come home, that was all. 2 words. Sometimes 2 words are the only thing keeping a person upright. And as I sat there, phone against my ear, the pieces began to move on their own, sliding into a picture I didn't want to see. All those evenings he'd rubbed my feet, how many of them had ended with him at his laptop after I'd gone to bed? Emailing a realtor, all those papers he'd slid in front of me during the pregnancy. Insurance updates, Hospital forms, sign here, love, it's nothing. Just paperwork. How many of them had been something? How many of my own signatures had he studied, practiced, learned by heart? He hadn't snapped. He hadn't panicked. There had been no terrible moment of weakness I could almost forgive. He had planned it, step by step, in the same house, on the same nights, with the same hands that made me tea. He had planned every piece of it while pretending to love me. That is the wound that never fully closed. Grief is a luxury when you have a baby to feed. I gave myself the length of one gas station parking lot to fall apart. And then I did what 20 years of nursing had trained me to do. In a crisis, I stopped feeling and started counting. Here is what I actually had. I was 6 weeks into unpaid maternity leave. My job was protected, but not a single paycheck was coming until I went back. The money I earned went into the joint account, the one Marcus had swept clean, my own small checking account, the one I'd kept since before the marriage almost out of habit, held $211. I called the bank from the car, not to beg, but to confirm the number and to freeze what little was mine before he could reach it too. The woman on the line couldn't undo what he'd done, but she made sure the last thing I owned stayed mine. $211, a car I'd been told not to drive, and a 5-day-old daughter. I did the math the way I read a chart coldly, completely, and knew I needed cash today. So I drove to a jewelry store in Carmel. The owner was an older man with silver hair and reading glasses on a chain. The kind of man who has watched many people sell things they love. He examined my wedding ring under his loupe for less than a minute. "I can give you $900, he said, and then, watching my face. "These things hold their value better than people think, but not as well as we'd like." I nodded before he finished. $900. He looked mildly surprised that I didn't haggle. "You don't want to think it over. If I think it over," I said, "I won't do it." He understood. Men his age usually do. He counted the bills out twice. Then, as I turned to go, he slid a small package across the glass, a pack of polishing cloths, the kind they sell for $8 or $9. "No charge," he said quietly, not quite meeting my eyes. It was such a small thing, a stranger softening a hard day by $9. I stood in his doorway and nearly cried over polishing clothes, and I never forgot it. I didn't know yet that this was the first of them, that kindness, once it starts, has a way of finding you again. $900 plus my $211. From that, I set aside what a newborn burns through formula, a fresh case of diapers, wipes to replace the half-pack in the bag, call it $70 that couldn't be spent on anything else. The rest was my bridge to my mother's house, and I meant to guard every dollar of it. The obvious thing was to drive. Bloomington was barely an hour south, but my discharge papers said it plainly, no driving for 2 weeks after a cesarean, and I felt the truth of it every time the incision pulled. Worse. When I finally reached a lawyer's office by phone that afternoon, a woman named Diane, recommended by my mother's church friend, the first thing she told me was not to move the car at all. It was titled in both our names. Until a court sorted out what belonged to whom, anything I did with a jointly owned asset could be turned against me. "Leave it," she said. "Don't give him a story to the—" My mother offered to come get me, but Ruth is 69. Her night vision is going, and the drive up meant an hour of interstate in the dark, then an hour back with a newborn in the seat. I couldn't ask her to make that drive frightened, and I couldn't put Wren in a car with a driver who could barely see the lane lines. So I chose the last option left, the humble one, a bus. A nurse I'd worked beside for a decade, Priya, who'd texted the moment she heard drove down, took one look at me and asked nothing I couldn't answer. She brought a car seat base and a travel bottle warmer she swore she never used. She drove Ren and me to the downtown Indianapolis bus terminal, hugged me hard enough to hurt, and pressed $40 into my hand that I tried and failed to refuse. I bought one ticket south. It cost less than a nice dinner. And with Ren asleep against my chest, I walked into that station carrying everything I had left in the world, which was almost nothing, and which was also, though I didn't know it yet, about to be enough. The station smelled like burnt coffee and diesel, and everyone in it was in a hurry to be somewhere else. Nobody notices a woman moving slowly because every step pulls against fresh stitches. Nobody, that is, except that I noticed him. An older man stood at the ticket counter, patting the pockets of a canvas jacket gone soft and pale with age. He checked the same 2 pockets 3 times, the way people do when they already know the answer and can't bear to accept it. "I had it right here," he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was something worse, quietly bewildered, the tone of a man unused to being helpless. "Sir," the clerk said, not unkindly, "without payment, I can't issue the ticket." "Of course. I understand." He didn't argue. He simply stepped aside to let the line move on, folding his hands in front of him. And the small dignity of that, the way he refused to make it anyone else's problem, was what undid me. Someone behind him sighed. Someone muttered to hurry up. He kept his eyes down, more embarrassed than upset. An old man whose wallet had been lifted clean out of his pocket in a crowd that had already forgotten him. I looked at the money in my hand. I had counted it so carefully. There was exactly enough. Once I reached my mother's for the diapers and formula that would get Ren through her first week, or there was enough for a stranger's bus ticket, not both. 2 voices spoke at the same time inside me. One was sharp and certain. "Nora, stop. Your baby comes first. You have nothing. You cannot afford to be generous." And the other was quieter, and it asked only one thing. What if that were your father? My dad had been gone 8 years, a carpenter with sawdust always in the creases of his hands. A man who'd have given his last dollar to a stranger and called it nothing. If he'd ever stood in a station like this, stranded and ashamed, I would have wanted anyone to see him. Do not look away. I walked to the counter before I could talk myself out of it. "I'll pay for his ticket." The clerk looked relieved. The old man turned, and for a moment he didn't understand. Then he did, and he shook his head. "No," he said gently. "You have a baby." "I know. I can't let you do that. You didn't ask me to. That's rather the point." Something in his face changed, then not surprise exactly, but a kind of careful attention, as if he were seeing me properly for the first time. He let me pay. While the clerk printed his ticket, he looked down at the small shape asleep against my chest. "She's beautiful," he said. "What's her name?" "Ren. Ren." He said it softly, like he was setting it somewhere safe. "And yours, Nora." He held out his hand. His grip was warm and dry, despite the cold that came in every time the doors opened. "I won't forget your kindness, Nora," he said. And I smiled the polite smile you give a stranger, because people say things like that all the time. It's what you say, then the buses swallow you both, and you never see each other again. And the words dissolve into the ordinary traffic of a life. I didn't hold it against him. I just didn't believe it meant anything. The boarding call echoed through the terminal. I gathered Ren and the diaper bag, and Priya's $40 folded in my coat, and I started toward my gate. Halfway there, I glanced back. He was still standing where I'd left him, under the flat white station lights, and he raised one hand in a small, unhurried wave. I waved back. Then I climbed onto that bus, believing I'd just said goodbye to a stranger. I had no idea that one small moment would become the turning point of my entire life. I found a seat near the back and settled Wren against me. Somewhere south of the city, the lights thinned out and the window went dark, and she slept through all of it the whole ruined day. The empty house, the forged name, the 90 minutes of highway carrying us toward a life neither of us had planned. Babies don't know when the world has fallen apart. They only know whether they are warm, fed, and being held. I sat in the dark with my daughter breathing against my collarbone and thought that's all she needs from me tonight. Warm, fed, held. Everything else I would figure out tomorrow. And the day after. And every day it took. But not tonight. Tonight I just held on. My mother was waiting under the single light at the Bloomington station in the 12-year-old Subaru she refuses to trade in. She saw me before I saw her, saw the diaper bag on one shoulder, and whatever exhaustion was written on my face, and she crossed the pavement faster than a woman her age should move. She didn't ask a single question. She put one arm around me, careful, so careful, not to press where the incision was, and she said the only 2 words a person can survive on. "Oh, sweetheart," that was all. No lecture. No, I never trusted him. No, I told you. Just her arm around me and my daughter between us, and the smell of her house already in her cardigan. Ruth's little ranch hadn't changed much since Dad died. The same wind spinner turned in the backyard. His old blue recliner still sat by the window where he used to read the Sunday paper. Except now it was buried under folded baby blankets she'd been washing for a week. She had been getting ready for Wren's first visit for a month. Neither of us had imagined it would become the place we lived. Those first days blurred. Feed Wren, change Wren, take the pain medication, sleep in 45-minute pieces, try not to cry where my mother could see. One afternoon, I came into the kitchen and found her bent over a yellow legal pad with an old calculator, adding a column of numbers. When she noticed me, she turned the pad face down, too quickly. "What are you doing? Nothing, honey. Mama." She sighed the way she does when a thing can't be hidden. I was working out how far the checks stretch for 38 years as an elementary school secretary had earned her a modest pension, and Social Security on top of it, enough for one careful woman in a paid-off house, not 3. She had never in her life expected to be doing arithmetic at 69 to feed her daughter and her grandchild. That did something to me that losing the house hadn't. I decided, sitting at that table, that I would not let this land on her. The next week, I drove no. I didn't drive. Priya drove me again up to a lawyer's office in downtown Indianapolis. Diane Fowler had come recommended by Sylvia, my mother's friend from the church choir, who'd known Diane for 30 years and vouched for her the way only a church friend can. Diane was maybe 60, gray bob, comfortable shoes, the kind of sharp eyes that have read a lot of bad contracts. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, then opened a fresh legal pad. "I have good news and bad news," she said. "The good news is that what your husband did is not a gray area. Your house was titled in both your names. That means it could not be sold without your genuine signature, and yours was forged." He ran the closing through a remote online notary and slipped a fabricated signature past it. In this country, a forged deed is void, not weak, not contestable, void. From the moment it was signed, it transferred nothing. Legally, that house is still yours. For one dizzy second, I felt the ground come back. Then she raised her hand. The bad news is that proving it and unwinding it takes time, often the better part of a year. The buyers are victims too. They'll fight their own battle with the title insurer. And getting your house back on paper doesn't put a roof over you and that baby tonight. Worse, if you want Marcus to face what he's done, not just lose the house, but answer for it, we have to prove two things a judge can hold in his hand: intent and where the money went. I asked the question I dreaded, and if we can't prove it, then he keeps what he hid and he walks. She let that sit. So, do you have anything, records, statements, anything at all, because he's had months to make sure you don't? And that was the moment the fear turned into something else. I almost laughed. Diane, I said, 20 years in nursing taught me one thing. You document everything. Charts don't lie. Through the whole pregnancy, some instinct I couldn't have named had made me photograph every page he handed me and email the copies to my work account, then lock the printouts in my hospital locker. The one place on earth Marcus Vale had never once set foot. Diane put down her pen and looked at me for a long moment. Mrs. Whitaker, she said slowly, I was afraid you'd say you had nothing. You may have just handed me the whole case. 2 weeks after the bus, someone knocked on my mother's door. Ruth looked through the front window and frowned. Nora, there's an older gentleman here asking for you. I came out drying my hands, and there he was on the porch, the same canvas jacket, the same worn suitcase, the same gentle, unhurried smile. For a second, I couldn't place him. Then I saw his eyes. The bus station, I said. He nodded, almost shy about it. I hope I'm not intruding. He held out an envelope. I came to repay what you spent on me. I laughed a little. You drove all this way for a bus ticket. No, his voice caught, just slightly. I came because my wife would have been very disappointed in me if I hadn't thanked you properly. The way he said my wife in the past tense, and with such care told me she was gone before he said another word, I stepped aside. Would you like some coffee? My mother already had a pot going. Within minutes, the three of us were around her old oak table, and Wren was dozing in her bassinet where the old man could watch her. He admired her the way people do when they've loved a whole life and know how fast it goes. He drew a small photograph from his breast pocket, a silver-haired woman laughing beside him on a lake shore. Wind in her hair. My Eleanor. 52 years. He looked at it a moment longer than he meant to. She'd have liked you. Neither of us mentioned money. We talked about gardens and Indiana winters, and the way babies sleep through everything. It was, for an hour, simply kind. Then headlights swept across the kitchen window. A black Lincoln Navigator pulled into the driveway, and a second one stopped behind it. My mother half rose. Were you expecting company? The old man set his cup down quietly. I suppose they've finally found me. 2 men in dark suits came up the walk, and the moment I opened the door, relief flooded the younger one's face. There you are, Mr. Ashford. The room went silent. We've been trying to reach you for days, sir. Your daughter is worried sick. The board meeting's been postponed. Board meeting. I looked from one face to the other. Ashford. Everyone in Indiana knew that name: the factories, the scholarships, the wing of the Children's Hospital in Indianapolis with Ashford carved over the door. The quiet man who'd let me buy him a bus ticket wasn't just some stranded grandfather. He was one of the most powerful men in the state. He stood slowly and turned to me with an expression caught between apology and gratitude. I owe you the truth. Someone did steal my wallet. That part was real, and I was traveling alone. I simply left out that my family owns Ashford Industrial. He saw the question forming and answered it before I could ask. Once a year, I make a trip back to Eleanor's hometown, no security, no phone, no driver. It's a promise I made her that I'd go the plain way we went when we were young and had nothing. My people lose me every single year. They hate it. A faint smile. I let them. I didn't know what to say, so I said the true thing. I don't need charity, Mr. Ashford. He smiled, almost as if he'd expected exactly that answer. I wouldn't respect you if you did. He didn't reach for a checkbook. Instead, he slid a single business card across the table, not money, just a name. Jean Pruitt, forensic financial consultant. I didn't come to change your life with money, he said. I came to ask if you'll let me help you get your life back. You decide what happens after you meet him. Nothing more. I looked at my mother. She gave the smallest nod. Okay, I said. 2 days later, I sat across from Jean Pruitt, a rumpled man who looked more like a retired accountant than someone who put people in prison, right down to the coffee mug that read, World's Okayest Grandpa. For 3 hours, he spread my locker documents across a conference table and highlighted dates in yellow, saying almost nothing. Finally, he leaned back. This wasn't impulsive, he said. I know. No, you haven't yet. He tapped to the timeline. The first suspicious transfer happened 9 months ago, 3 days after you announced the pregnancy. The room seemed to tilt. I remembered that night exactly barbecue. One ultrasound photo posted online. Marcus toasting with sparkling cider because I couldn't drink. That same week, he'd opened the first Shell account. The money hadn't vanished overnight. It had been bleeding out for months, a little at a time, through accounts built to hide it while he made me tea. By early October, we believed we had enough to ask a judge to freeze what remained of Marcus's assets before he could move them. Diane warned me not to celebrate. Emergency orders are a high bar, she said in the car. Judges don't like to freeze a man's accounts on a Tuesday morning without airtight proof. If we lose this one, it doesn't mean we've lost the case. It means we weren't ready for that particular task. Do you understand the difference? I said I did. I didn't. I walked into that courthouse certain that justice had finally arrived on schedule. 43 minutes later, we lost. The judge didn't deny it because he believed Marcus. He denied it because the evidence, troubling as it was, didn't yet meet the specific standard for that specific emergency order. The money trail Jean had built was strong, but not, on that morning, complete enough to justify freezing accounts before a full hearing. It was a procedure, not a verdict. Diane had told me exactly this would happen. It didn't make the hallway outside any easier to walk through. Because there, in that hallway, reporters had gathered not for me, but because word had begun to spread about a financial advisor under a cloud. Marcus stood in his good Navy suit and smiled into their cameras. Actually smiled. I've always believed the truth would come out, he told them, calm as Sunday. I stood maybe 20 feet away, holding Diane's briefcase against my chest like a shield while the shutters clicked. And to anyone watching, it must have looked exactly like a man being vindicated and the bitter wife who'd tried to ruin him. That night, Jean called with something that should have frightened me more than it did. You should know who you're dealing with, he said. He wasn't sloppy. He was patient. We found a second passport application, a leased mailbox under another name, an account offshore, Nora. He built himself a door out of the country months ago. Then why is he still here? I asked. Why walk into a courtroom instead of vanishing? Jean was quiet for a moment. 2 reasons. In my experience, greed, there's still money he hasn't finished pulling, and men like this never leave $1 on the table, and arrogance. He chose the next words carefully. He doesn't think you can touch him. He watched you sign whatever he put in front of you for years. In his mind, you're not a threat. You're the woman who trusted him. He's staying because he's certain you're too broken to fight, and running would admit otherwise. I hung up and sat with that for a long time. He was still here because he despised me. It was the cruelest thing I'd heard yet. And though I couldn't have explained why the first thing that made me feel like I might win, but that came later. That night, I only felt the weight. After Ruth had gone to bed and Wren was finally asleep, I went out to the back porch and sat in the October cold. And I let myself say the thing I'd been swallowing for weeks. What if this is it? I whispered to no one. What if he gets away with everything? The screen door opened behind me. Walter, he'd taken to visiting on Sundays, came out holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate and eased himself into the other chair as though he'd guessed I wouldn't be sleeping. I feel stupid, I said. I trusted him. You loved him, Walter said. Same thing. No, he handed me a mug, and his voice was very steady. Those are 2 very different things. One you owe an apology for, the other you don't. We sat with that. The wind spinner turned in the dark. Finally, I told him the truth. I'm so tired. I don't know if I'm strong enough to keep going. He didn't rush to reassure me. He looked out at the yard for a while. I buried the love of my life 18 months ago, he said. So believe me when I tell you this. Strength isn't something you wake up with. It's something you find because quitting hurts more than going on does. He turned to me then, and if you quit now because you're exhausted, Nora, he'll spend the rest of his life believing that decent people always give up. Don't hand him that. It's the last thing he's still trying to steal from you. I didn't answer, but I drank the hot chocolate, and somewhere in the cold and the dark and the small warmth of that mug, I decided I was not going to give it to him. 3 days later, Diane called me to her office. Someone came to see us, she said. You'll want to be here. A woman was already seated in the conference room when I arrived, expensive handbag, careful makeup, and eyes rimmed red from crying she'd tried to hide. I knew her face from the photographs Jean had pulled months earlier. Talia Brandt, Marcus's girlfriend. She stood, awkward, and didn't offer her hand. I'm not here because I'm a good person, she said. I want to be honest about that. I'm here because Marcus lied to me too. Nobody spoke. She sat back down and folded her hands to keep them still. He told me he was divorced. He showed me papers I know now they were fake. And he convinced me to put almost $400,000 into what he called a private opportunity. Her voice thinned. I started to doubt him a few weeks ago. Little things stopped adding up: a document with the wrong date, a signature that didn't match. So one night I tested him. I brought up your name on purpose, Nora, just to watch his face, to see what he'd say. She swallowed. I had my phone recording. I needed to know if I was crazy. She laid 3 things on the table, one at a time: a flash drive, a thick envelope of printed emails, wire confirmations, and contracts, and a second flash drive, smaller, that she pushed toward the center as if it burned her hand. Indiana only needs one person to consent to a recording, Diane said quietly, almost to herself. One party. This is admissible. Jean had been silent, flipping pages. His eyebrows climbed with each one. He reached the last of the emails, set them down, and for the first time since I'd met him, a slow smile spread across his face. For the first time, he said, I think we finally have everything. The full hearing came in late November, and I will spare you the 6 hours of it, because the truth needed no theater. Gene took the stand and did what he does: no drama, just numbers. One chart at a time. This transfer, this date, this shell account, opened here. Funds moved through 3 entities and returned to Mr. Vale's control here. Even the judge leaned forward. Facts are persuasive when they're organized. And Gene had organized everything. The title company's closing manager admitted, under Diane's gentle questioning, that Marcus had insisted on handling all communication himself, that she had never once spoken to me, never verified my identity, and had relied entirely on a remote online notarization later found to carry a forged signature. "I wish we'd caught it," she said, and I believed she did. Then a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit confirmed, plainly, that a separate criminal investigation into Marcus's client accounts was already underway independent of this courtroom. Something shifted in Marcus's face at that. His attorney stopped whispering back to him, and from that point on, when the questions turned toward the money, Marcus answered fewer and fewer of them. On the advice of counsel, I declined to answer. Again and again his right, and also, in that room, an answer of its own. Then Diane asked to play the recording. The judge allowed it, and Marcus's own voice filled the courtroom, relaxed, unhurried. The voice I'd heard across 1,000 dinners. "Once the house closes, everything gets easier." Then Talia's voice, "Careful. And what about Nora?" A small laugh, his laugh. "Nora. She signs whatever I put in front of her." The recording clicked off, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. It wasn't the money that stilled the room. It was the contempt, the easy, casual certainty that I was a thing to be managed, a signature on demand, a woman too trusting to ever be a threat. And here is the terrible symmetry of it. The very quality he'd built his whole plan on, that I was too small to fight back, was the thing that was now, in his own voice, convicting him. He had despised me so completely that he'd said it out loud into a phone, and that contempt had become the clearest evidence against him in the room. I looked at him then, and for the first time since I'd met Marcus Vale, I saw him afraid, not annoyed, not inconvenienced, afraid, the look of a man who has just understood that the woman he underestimated had been documenting everything. All along. The way she'd been trained to, charts don't lie. And neither, it turned out, did the wife he was so sure would never read the fine print. Near the end, the judge asked if I wished to make a statement. I stood, and I looked at my mother in the second row with Ren asleep against her shoulder, and every angry speech I'd rehearsed for months simply left me. None of it mattered anymore. "The day our daughter was born," I said, my eyes on Marcus. "You believed I'd lost everything." I looked at Ren. The truth is, she was the only thing worth keeping. Everything else was replaceable. Then I sat down, and the room was quiet in the way a room goes quiet when everyone already knows what's right. The judge read his findings without flourishing. He found that substantial evidence supported claims of fraud, forgery, and financial misconduct. He froze the disputed assets, ordered them preserved, and referred the evidence to criminal authorities. It was not the end of Marcus's reckoning. It was the beginning. In the months after, the state suspended his financial licenses. Former clients filed their own suits. The county charged him with forgery, identity theft, and wire fraud, and eventually he took a plea rather than face all of it in front of a jury. And the rest came, piece by piece, the way real justice does slowly, and in full, because the forged deed was void. The house was legally mine again. I could have moved back in. Restitution returned part of what he'd hidden. Some of it lost for good, but enough. The court gave me full custody, no visitation, and ordered the child support he'd been so sure he'd never pay. Talia recovered a portion of her $400,000 too. We were never friends, but we had been the same man's two lies. And there was a strange, quiet fairness in surviving him together. Walter came by on a Sunday that spring with a slim blue folder. "If it's money," I warned him, "I'm giving it back." He laughed. "I knew you'd say that." Inside was paperwork for an education trust, Wren's, untouchable until she reached college. "This isn't charity," he said before I could argue. "It's something Eleanor and I always meant to do for a child. You only reminded me not to stop believing in people." I hugged him. He patted my shoulder, terrible at being thanked. I still keep that pack of polishing cloths from the jeweler in a kitchen drawer. Kindness, once it starts, keeps finding you a jeweler, a nurse, an old man at a bus counter, a trust for a girl who'll never know the version of the world that almost swallowed her. Talia sent a letter, handwritten, a few weeks after the divorce was final. She didn't ask forgiveness. She didn't deserve to, and she knew it. She only hoped my daughter would grow up believing there are more honest people in the world than dishonest ones. I put the letter in a drawer, not because I forgave her, but because carrying anger forever would mean he'd stolen something else from me. I wasn't willing to give him that. I sold the White House. I never went back inside it. It was mine again. And I let it go anyway, because you don't rebuild on the site of a wound. Wren and I moved into a small townhouse 15 minutes from the hospital borrowed furniture. 2 folding chairs, echoes in every empty room. The first thing I hung was my mother's wind chimes. By the new front door, Ruth stood in the little kitchen and looked around and said, "It already feels more like home than that big house ever did." She was right. Home was never square footage. I'd only forgotten that for a while. About a year later, we drove past the old neighborhood on the way home from a birthday party. A young family lived in the White House now. A child's bike leaned against the garage. Wren pointed out the window. "House," she said. I smiled. "It is," I told her. And I kept driving, not slowing, not aching, not wondering what might have been. My father used to say a house gives you shelter, but the people inside it make it a home. It took losing one to find the other. If you've ever had to rebuild your life after someone broke your trust, tell me one thing in the comments. What was the small kindness that kept you standing? I read every one, and if Nora's story moved you, subscribe and stay with us, because next week, another ordinary person proves that decency isn't weakness. It's the last thing left standing.